to the computer. And yeah, well, Mark. Thank you for being with us here this morning. What I wanted to do was before we did literally any work on the buildings, I wanted to talk about adaptive reuse and then some of the philosophies that we're engaging with here at Montpelier. We don't necessarily have a set policy as a nonprofit for this, which we really should. But what I want to do is to have Mark talk to this and give kind of like a 10,000 foot view of the National Trust. And Mark, you are the what is your official title? You are the architect for the National Trust, but there's an endowed name, isn't there?
Yeah. So so I am the Graham Gund architect. Graham Gund now was he just passed away a couple of months ago. But Graham Gund was a pretty prolific architect based out of Boston. Um, a postmodern architect, and he established a big avid art collector. And because he was somewhat independently wealthy, he had the means to endow a position at the National Trust 20 plus years ago, almost 30 years ago, for an architect, preservation architect, to be on staff, to be responsible for generally broad stewardship of our sites from coast to coast. So that's my role. It's the Graham Gund architect or the senior director of preservation architecture. That's my fancy sounding role, but basically it's broad stewardship of our buildings and landscapes for 28 sites across the country.
And that's pretty important to have for the National Trust. And before we get into your discussion of adaptive reuse, wanted to just broadly introduce everybody here. We're partnering with the Fairfield Foundation down in Gloucester, and Kenneth Tappan is the mason for Fairfield, and they similar to what they've done with you with the trust, hire an architect to make sure that everything stays safe. Uh, Dave and Thane have hired Kenneth to manage some of the ruins that they own on as properties. Most prominent, which is Rosewell. And I don't know if you looked at our Facebook or Instagram feeds, but Monday and Tuesday we burned a lime brick at Rosewell, which was successful. And actually, that we're gonna have a Slate Fest 2025 tomorrow morning. We'll discuss the schedule with everybody to see how that works. So we should make t-shirts, yeah. But we successfully burned oyster shell in a rick, and it slaked. So, and that is not a hip term. It's you know what that is. It's making turning burnt lime into mortar. But and then everyone else is we also have a mason from Colonial Williamsburg, Madeline Bolton. So thank you for being here. And then we have folks from all over that have come and to attend the program. So we're really excited about that. So, but yeah, Mark, if you want to take it away at this point.
Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you're seeing my screen. Hopefully you're not seeing
Yeah.
my.
Yep.
Okay, you're seeing the full screen here, right? Not
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I didn't want to be too formal about it. This is our National Trust template, so it looks really formal, but I promise you that gets reused over and over and over again. So but yeah, so I appreciate it, Matt. I said it before. I'm sorry I can't be out there to actually join you in person. I do need to get out there to see Calm, but it's nice to see at least on the screen. And even in my absence, it was nice of you, Matt, to invite me to kind of set the stage for talking about adaptive reuse. Which, prior to joining the National Trust, my bread and butter in my career was adaptive reuse. So it's near and dear to my heart. It's something that I grew up in the preservation profession doing, and I feel very strongly that it's a pretty important piece of the built environment. So anyway, so just for those of you who don't know the trust as well, just to give you a really brief overview of the National Trust historic sites as well as my role. As I mentioned before, we have 28 sites across the country encompassing about 800 years of human and American history. And of those 28 sites, that includes, it says 310 roof structures. I got to review that because I think it's over 400 at this point, and about 4,200 acres. And for those of you who know Montpelier really well, um, Montpelier probably makes up about half of, the structures and the acreage. So, and 60,000 objects. Again, I think that's low. I think it's probably 80,000 objects. But, over 1 million visitors annually to all of our sites. And these sites, again, span 800 years of human history and architectural design, and anything from plantation sites to here you see Acoma Sky in New Mexico up in the top right near Albuquerque. That actually spans beyond 800 years. And then the Glass House in New Canaan there on the bottom right, 1949. So we span a significant both time period and, architectural typology.
Hey, Mark, not to interrupt.
Yeah.
Linz can give you more street cred by like 10 times, maybe 100 times multiplying your object count because it's a lot more
Yeah.
than the archaeology.
Yeah,
We
we
could
we
we
need to
could
go
talk
back and
some.
review those numbers. Yeah,
Yeah,
we,
yeah.
we've been using these numbers for the last couple of years, and I keep saying every time I present this, I'm like, you know what? We gotta fix this slide because there's no way that's accurate.
Cool.
And
Sorry to
so
interrupt.
no, you're fine. You're fine. And so again, our sites are located coast to coast. We have a pretty, um, you know, pretty heavy collection there in the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, as you would expect. Um, but again, coast to coast, Northeast to Southwest, and in North to South from, Chicago and Iowa down to San Antonio. And again, my role with the National Trust is broad stewardship of all of our sites. We have, three designation of sites. We have stewardship sites with which we both own and manage. We have co-stewardship sites like Montpelier where we own the site, but we have a separate 501c3 organization that runs the site. And then we have affiliated sites, which we don't either own or manage, but we do in the Historic Sites Department of the National Trust function as resources to those sites. So again, 28 sites across the country spanning 800 to 900 years of history. It's a very cool role. So uh, the National Trust has really been a leading voice for nearly 50 years and beyond, and really not just in the importance of reuse, but really in the preservation movement. Even before climate change and sustainability were hot topics, both on the consumer and the political stages, the National Trust has really been championing this idea of adaptive reuse as both a sustainable and an economically smart practice. This is a poster here on the right, and for the preservation movement, that this is this is one of the early images. This idea of a building as a gas can. This is a poster from 1980 from the National Trust's Preservation Week, and so going back 45 years. Um, and this early idea that a typical 50,000 square foot building, commercial building embodies this idea of embodied energy within a building. Um, this structure would embody the equivalent of 640,000 gallons of gasoline. This was the National Trust really taking this to the people to understand the importance of both preservation but also adaptive reuse. And if we think about the life cycle of a building, and thinking about new construction, right? It's not just the construction and the use of a building. It's everything that goes in from raw materials to end of life for a building. And the idea that we're never going to get away from that first um, construction period of the building. But if we can avoid all this cycle by reusing and staying just within that embodied energy, operating and adapting and reusing existing buildings, we can really, that that we can really reuse these structures and not only for economic reasons, but also, sustainable practices, and reducing the effects of climate change. So, according to Architecture 2030, which is a national nonprofit that was established to basically monitor embodied energy and make recommendations for the entire architecture field as it relates to sustainability, um, approximately 42% of our annual global CO2 emissions, um, 37% of emissions generated by buildings specifically, um, are from buildings, and the building construction and operations. And this 30% that exceeds, amazingly enough, both the industry and transportation sectors. So, 10% of this 37% just in construction itself, but then the remaining 27% out of operations. And if we consider that more than a third of the existing buildings in the United States are over 50 years old, that really brings it into a preservation question. By the Secretary of the Interior standards, uh, 50 years and beyond technically qualifies it as old, uh, or even qualifying for the National Register. So, all that is to say that preservationists really have an opportunity and a responsibility to directly engage in this conversation on adaptive reuse, both on the sustainability side, but also, the economics of adaptive reuse. So the National Trust, particularly here of late, has developed a new program that we're going to be rolling out, and it's going to be a main focus of the National Trust. I think I'm actually jumping the gun on our CEO making this announcement. So make sure we keep it quiet in this group. But this Resilient Heritage campaign that we're going to be putting out, which really ties into our work over the last 50 years, but really is bringing it back to helping both individuals, small business owners, as well as our community leaders, this idea of reuse and retrofit and the importance of adaptive reuse. We also have a recovery and resilience piece of this that deals with adaptation. But what I want to focus on today really is this reuse and retrofit idea of adaptive reuse. I don't think I have to sell any of you in the room on, the benefits of adaptive reuse. Here's just some fun images of really interesting adaptive reuse projects completed over the last decade or so. I think the oldest one here is, for those of you who know Mass MoCA, in the center right, uh, or no, sorry, center top. A total adaptive reuse of a industrial complex. Tens of thousands of square foot for a modern art museum. I actually visited this earlier this year for the first time, and just blown away by a phenomenal adaptive reuse project. But anything from Tammany Hall in New York, there at the bottom left, which it's an intriguing photo, but a great reuse of that building from 1929. This is a 2020 adaptive reuse project to the top right, which is the Bottle Works district in Indianapolis, which was a $300 million mixed-use adaptive reuse redevelopment of a 1920s Coca-Cola bottling plant. And what these projects successfully do, particularly on these large-scale projects like the Bottle Works project and like Mass MoCA, is these are direct reinvestments in existing buildings. And um, even the most ardent, modernist or new construction buff is still going to love to come to a place like Bottle Works with this wonderful Art Deco, architecture that, really is getting on over 100 years old, but has been retrofitted and brought back to its, original luster. It's a phenomenal project. If you ever go to Indianapolis, go check that out. I may or may not have done that project. So again, benefits of adaptive reuse. I think we all know this. There's an environmental and sustainability benefit, economic benefit, as well as this feel good benefit the cultural and social benefits. You know, we know we're reducing waste when we do this, 50% to 75% of, reduction in embodied carbon emissions just by using or reusing an existing structure, right? Um, Options for, cost savings for developers and end users. Um, from studies not just by the National Trust but by the federal government. It costs 40% less per square foot just to reuse a building versus tearing it down and reconstructing it. And then in sorry, my phone's ringing here. And then in New York City specifically, though, I think they expanded this study to all, major metropolitan areas. It's 16%, less cost to the end user to reuse an existing structure. So between, the environmental benefits and then the economic benefits, there's no reason to do this at all. And then again, this feel good idea, cultural and social benefits. Again, we're preserving our communities, right? We're enforcing neighborhood character that in some cases has been there for decades, if not centuries. And we're preserving our identity as Americans. Um, I think it's notable to add that the American Institute of Architects, the AIA, does a quarterly billings index. Um, and what that is quarterly they report on what architecture firms are doing and how and what projects they're working on. Um, and there's been a notable shift in the last 20 years from new construction to existing buildings. And in 2022, and this had happened before, but most notably in 2022, renovations, retrofits, and additions to existing buildings accounted for 52% of all architectural firm billings, which is to say that adaptive reuse overtook new construction. And while that has kind of waffled back and forth over the last several years, we do not expect as the architectural community for that ever to go back below 50%. So not only firms doing this, but we're seeing a lot of architecture schools use, for their studio projects, use existing buildings as the baseline for architectural design. So that's really exciting, and that just shows where we're going with adaptive reuse. So before I head it back to Matt, I just wanted to just show off one of the National Trust's most recent completed and probably one of the really exciting adaptive reuse projects that we've done with one of our buildings, of which there have been several, but I just want to highlight the David Rockefeller Creative Arts Center. This is at the Rockefeller Estate in Tarrytown, New York. Another phenomenal place. This is just one structure of I can't remember the number of structures, but it's the Rockefeller Estate. As you can expect, it's a sprawling estate on top of the mountain, and it's pretty impressive. But this is a 14,000 foot creative arts center that was opened in 2022, uh, which uh, uh, which showcases performing, literary, and visual arts in what was the original orangery there at the Rockefeller Estate. So this was built as part of the Rockefeller Estate, or KIKET, as it's called. And John D. Rockefeller built this, and this was built in 1908 along with the other structures. This structure was modeled after the orangery that's at Versailles. Um, and housed all of the orange and other citrus trees during the winter months. So as we all do, in the winter when our orange trees and lemon trees, what it's called, we take them into our orangeries, right? Um, so I mean it's an amusing structure. I mean, but yeah, I mean that's what this was. So after World War II, this really wasn't used this way. It was mostly storage, and it was kind of forgotten on the site. It's a ways away from the actual mansion and the other buildings on site. So it was kind of left again after World War II really fell into disrepair. And so this is from 2019, really poor, poor condition. Been kind of left to the elements. Really, there were holes in the roof. Um, Again, really not used. There was even discussion between the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, which runs the site, um, and the National Trust to even potentially demolish this building, which is just amazing to think about. But it was in that bad a shape that, structurally they were considering, the National Trust was considering bulldozing this. Uh, Fortunately, and obviously we didn't. This was opened in fall of 2022. Um, and I think you can just tell it's an amazing interior, and it contains a multi-purpose performance and rehearsal space there on the top right, gallery and exhibition space, resident artist workspace, space for educational programs. Just like Calm, where you're sitting, it's an opportunity uh, to bring the community into a space where many even in the area haven't visited, so they can exhibit, they can do performing arts, and invite people in, even those who may not even want to go to Kikit itself, but a wonderful adaptive reuse project at Kaiken and within the National Trust. So the other thing to note here is that this is also a net zero building, which means it produces as much or more energy than it actually needs to operate, which is another fantastic thing and certainly a goal of the National Trust. So the National Trust, we are looking for opportunities, always looking for opportunities to support and, in our own case, for our own buildings, implement transformative adaptive reuse projects like this and like Calm. So when Matt called me with this idea of adapting the Montpelier store, the ESO building into a community oriented uh, uh, archaeology lab. Like this is what one my bread and butter from well before coming to the National Trust, but it's exactly what the National Trust really wants to do. So with that, I'm really happy to hand it back over to you, Matt. Enjoy the conversation and enjoy my view of Calm, even though I'm not there to to join you all.
Well, thanks, Mark. I can't think of another person that was more supportive of our use of this building. So much of our success we owe to you, Mark. So thank you. I was like, Liz, you remember this when I called Mark, I called you about a month after the fire with the idea we had bantered about. And our conversation just, it got us over that hump. It got us to that point where it's like, oh my God, there could be a silver lining in what is just like a horrible, horrible, horrible event. And I think that really powered us through to where we are today. So thank you, Mark, for all your
Yeah, I,
support.
I can't remember if it was the day of or it was probably the next day after the fire where you and I spoke, and I could hear it in your voice, just the sadness of of what you were experiencing and the loss.
Mhm.
And yeah, and then a month later, this idea of, hey, we have an opportunity here to a building that has been long vacant, particularly since COVID, but really underutilized even before then. And the
Yeah.
idea then, to go outside the gates of Montpelier, uh, across from the train depot, and actually re-engage this building for this purpose, there was a lot of hope and excitement in your voice then. So,
Yeah.
yay adaptive reuse, yay preservation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For us, just for there's preservation and then there's therapy. It's just definitely therapy. So, but yeah, no, we're and Mark, you're welcome to stay.
Oh, I
I'm
will.
gonna
I will.
oh good. I'm gonna talk about the three R's of adaptive reuse that we're adopting here. And this is something that just part of the history of what we've done here at Montpelier. So, and what I'll do is in a second I'll go ahead and share screens. But yeah, this for Montpelier, our adaptation of adaptive reuse is pretty. There's some concepts that go throughout the thread of historic preservation and historic architecture, which is the three choices you can do with the building, which is restoration, which is like what we have with the main house, where you try to restore it to a period and keep all the physical fabric intact. And this is like the discussion that Kenneth and I were having on that water table, the brick. I'll show that in a second. But in that case, it was like the question is which of the brick was sawn by Ray Canetti and are reinstalls and which is the original brick. And part of that was our goal with the restoration was to keep as much original fabric as possible, even if it costs more money to keep it, because there was sacred elements in that. This was part of those bricks, the woodwork is part of the historic fabric of the building. It's a witness to the Madison period. It's a witness to the work that the enslaved did, the enslaved masons, the enslaved carpenters, and that bears testimony to their lives. The other thing you see a lot at Montpelier is the other R is reconstruction. And that's where we found a site through archaeology and then we've rebuilt it. And in that format, it's a hard decision to make because in the process of doing that can be destructive because you have to do the archaeology and do it completely to allow reconstruction. And we'll talk about that with the South Yard. And then there's the question of, is that accurate? I mean, no restoration or reconstruction is 100% accurate. Like when you go in the main house, there's steel beams that hold the house up, and air and HVAC systems that intrude in that space. So there's nothing that's completely accurate. And then the third R is renovation, and that spans the gamut from some preserving a building like Mark you were talking about, adaptive reuse, and it can span from like wholesale gutting of a building without much care. And we got some examples of that here, which have some economic rationale that can be used to justify it, or renovations where you're not necessarily restoring. Like we haven't restored this building, but we've renovated it for adaptive reuse. And in the process, what we absolutely prioritized was keeping all the fabric that dated, what was from the DuPont period, from its use as a store, to lean in on that history and give people when they come in an understanding of the sense of how we're using this space, in a similar vein to the store. It's a drop-in space. It's also a workspace, and there's a lot of similarities with that. Now we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to renovation. And then from there, there's if you're not actually using a building, and we talked a little bit about this about the Arlington, the home for an enslaved family over at Arlington House. That building's not being used, but we've stabilized it, and we've stabilized it for its use in the future, so it doesn't fall down. And then you can imagine what the final category of what you can do to a building is, which is actually there are actually two more categories. But what could be the other thing you could do with an old building that's not being used? Oh my God, that's a third variety. Holy yeah. Okay, so yeah, which you can have an accidental burning, like with the lab, and it was not abandoned. We were in it, so that was like horrible. But yeah, it neglect, and you could have a fire that happens. And so one of them is neglect, where you just don't do anything to it. And there's something called, which a lot of the property managers here have leaned into, which is demolition by neglect. And that's actually potentially one of the worst things that can happen, because demolition by neglect, the building never gets recorded. And then you go out one day after a storm and the whole thing's collapsed and you've lost all the information on the building. The other is, of course, demolition. And that's kind of very, very different from a fire, because with demolition, hopefully, if you're demolishing a building, there's a better chance in a thoughtful process that you've recorded. You take architectural rendered photographs of it, so it could be put into CAD. You'd make a 3D model of it, so it could be either reconstructed as a model or the information retained. Save samples that are important before the demolition. So those are the three R's, and then which is how to actually use a building, and then stabilization and neglect. And what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and share screens at this point, and let's see. Oh, come back here. Hide meeting controls always There it is. I have floating meeting controls. And let me close out some of these things. And what we'll get to is the model that we have for the property. And this model is a full view of the property, but in 3D. And so we've rendered, quite a few of the buildings. Actually, Tessa has, and the IMLS project that we did several years ago allowed these buildings to be rendered. And this gives, a sense of, the structures that are on the landscape. The other way you can look at this, this is all on the web, and I'm gonna send you links to this so you can do fuller exploration of this. The other way to represent this that I'll use as well in case this model crashes, because sometimes it can be hard in the computer, is like a Google Map version of the property. And this is one where it's like a bird's eye view with an aerial. And so if we zoom in here, the areas I'm going to be talking about first are, for restoration are the Gilmore cabin and the train station. But we'll go over to this model for this, and for the Gilmore cabin, this is one of the first buildings that we actually restored. And we restored this after Rebecca Gilmore Coleman, who's the great granddaughter of George and Polly Gilmore, approached us and told us the history of what at that point was a building that looked something like this. All right, it's mad at me. It's slowly coming out. Let me see if the 2D version looks better. We might have to switch to 2D. Time on that. Yeah, we'll switch to 2D and we'll go back to the 3D. But when we started looking at the building, the Gilmore cabin, and when Rebecca Gilmore Pullman approached us, the building looked like this. And this is in the springtime. So in the summertime, you literally couldn't see the building. It was covered in poison ivy vines and with invasives. And what she said is this cabin was built by her great grandparents who were freed upon emancipation in 1865 and were owned by the Madisons. And so she asked, not only would, you all save this building, but also would you be interested in restoring it as an example of a freedman's cabin? And so we began engaging in discussions, started doing investigations of the building, learned that, this is a photo from 1911, the Gilmore family. It was taken potentially in anticipation of the court case that happened in 1920 that came from how to divide the property between the heirs. But it shows the original core of the cabin right here. And then you can see the seam in the roof, which is an addition. And if you look at the picture right here, what you can see is that the log portion of the house is in relatively good shape. And when we did the restoration of the cabin, this portion of the cabin that was built in 1910 had basically nearly collapsed. And so in consultation with the Gilmore family, with historic architects and historians from the Carter Woodson Institute over at UVA, what the decision was to restore the building back to its 1873 appearance. And there's a long history there that I won't get into. And so with this restoration, we chose a time period, which is, standard practice because you have to restore to a time period if you're restoring it. And we chose the 1880s as the time period to restore it to. And this really helped capture a period of history that had been lost to oral history with the family, and that they were interested in going back to and fit in with our goals of interpretation. And the final outcome of the cabin, you can see in this picture right here, when we opened it in 2005, it was the first building that had been restored at Montpelier and set the precedent for the restoration of the mansion. So this is something that really, and we also, of course, worked with the National Trust. Your predecessor, Mark, Bill DuPont, which ironically not related to the DuPonts of DuPont fame here, but Bill worked with us on the decision to tear down DuPont additions that were over 100 years old to go back to that period. Gilmore cabin preceded this, and so it was a really important milestone in everything that we did. And as a building has been really effective in engaging the descendant community, and was really that for the community was the first visible evidence of our restoration work and our interpretive work that could be seen right on Route 20, which has been incredibly important for our work with the Orange County African American Historical Society and the descendant community. So huge impact with the restoration there. And then another building that we restored that you all can visit is the train station. And let's go back and see if the 3D map is still mad at us. We'll zoom out and head up the road here. I love this. I just love this map. So I could live in this map. So here's the train station right here, and these are models that Tessa Honeycutt developed for us in SketchUp. And for the train station, this is a building that we restored to its 1910 appearance, complete with segregated entrances. And so when we did the restoration work on this building, and you can these maps, you can go in and drill down on all the records that are in these buildings. So if we go to historic images here, this brings up a Google folder of what the building looked like, for example, when we started the restoration. And in this case, it was the colored entrance was where the post office was. The white entrance was closed and the building wasn't accessible to the public. But then we restored it to its 1911 appearance as a segregated building. And this is something we did in collaboration with the Orange County African American Historical Society in terms of consulting on how to do this and do it respectfully to a building that's visible, very visible to the community. We didn't want to do this restoration without consulting with the local community. So these two buildings really set these restorations in some ways were in their own way a bit of reconciliation with the community as well, which is really cool. So that's an art too. This is how restoration should work, and all these reuses should work. And then the final version of restoration that's very well known, and I'm going to keep with the model here because this is just it's our dream to one day do this with all of the buildings. And there we are at the Esso station. We'll get back to this building. But this map can be incredibly difficult to orient yourself in. I've been here for 25 years and I still get lost in it. So turning here to head towards the main house, there's Center Road, and we'll go up Center Drive here and head to the main house. And in this case, let me move this over. I'm gonna turn the roof back on. In this case, what we've got is this is a 3D model of the main house. And so I'm gonna teeter back and forth between talking about the model and the restoration of the house. And with the restoration of the house, one of the things that we did was, and you can really see it dramatically from the back view here, is we took down basically, in some ways, demolished a early 20th century manor home, a home that was built by 1908. And this was done, completed, our restoration was completed by 2008. So technically we demolished a 100-year-old building. And this is what the main house looked like when we began. Well, this is what the main house looked like in 1905, when this photo was taken, because the kitchen on the north end had not been added yet. That was added by 1908. But we removed all these elements, and the removal process, I've got, there are images of the removal process. Do I have them here? Okay, I thought I had them. I hadn't, but I'll fix this, and then you all can go in and click on this part of the building and see it. But basically, the removals from the DuPont additions, they entailed and removal of all elements of the main house that postdated the Madison era, involved removing elements of the main house, for example, with a front portico that included a front porch that was built by 1848. So the Civil War soldiers that visited Montpelier, one of them actually did a drawing of the house, and it had the railings that you see there, the cast iron railings. So the porch, part of the structure that we demolished was an antebellum building. And so, but one of the things that we did with deconstruction is we recorded everything and did photographic recordations and both, in digital form. And we did them with the idea that the model that we've got right here of the main house in its 1820s appearance, the DuPont house could be reconstructed. So we could build a version. And this is one thing, if IMLS still existed, and hopefully it will, is one of the next grants we were looking at was to build a 3D version of the DuPont house and then take all the deconstruction images that are part of that deconstruction process and embed them in the building. And what I mean by this is, remember when we were outside the house yesterday and we were looking at the water table right here, and we were looking at this guy right here, and this actually, oh my goodness, I just realized this is not accurate. This is it's flat. Yeah, this needs to be rendered with the molded bricks. As I know, Kenneth's ready to walk out. He's like, that does it. So, and what's amazing about this model, other than the waterline bricks not being rendered properly, is this model it's done in 3ds Max, which is a CAD product, Autodesk product, and that is accurate to like 100th of an inch in some cases. When we brought it into SketchUp, which is a GIS product, the folks that did this for us at the University of Arkansas's CAST, Center for Advanced Spatial Technology, kept that accuracy within the building. So all of these elements, like if you go into GIS and measure the distance from this window to this window, it's accurate to what oh my God, the person that did this. Not Tessa, the person at CAST. Anyways, it'll come to me in a minute. When I start talking, I lose track of names. She assured me that it was not going to be no longer accurate to like, 100th of an inch, but more to like a quarter of an inch. But when you look at the scale of this, that's like less than a pixel. So it's all good. Don't worry, folks. But what's important about this is we're embedding all of our information into this. So for example, with this right here, we're what Kenneth and I were talking about is, what's the evidence for which of these water bricks have been replaced. So when you go into this model and you click on individual elements, what comes up is all sorts of pictures that Tessa weeded through to and tagged with these elements. So for this window right here, and I love this photo. I showed this one to Kenneth earlier because Kenneth was saying some of this looks like Ray Kennedys work. And oh, by the way, there's Ray Kennedy. So at this very location. So yeah, Kenneth, you saw your man's work there. And what you can see is the water brick up here is a little rough. And when you look at the photo from yesterday, and I'm not going to bring up that photo because it'll get too complicated for the computer. I got to bring up another piece of software for that. But makes me want to revisit those bricks because these guys right here, these ones right here are intact. And and you can see the mortar, like this is before the masonry restoration. As I remember, this part in here, I think did collapse because you can see what was a barred window today, which was what was here in the 18th century when the renovations were done to the house. And these are renovations that were done in 1848. When these renovations were done, what they put in is a double sashed window, which is a 3/1 up top and a 3/2 in the bottom. It's a 6x3 window with the top sash being three panes of glass. When they did this, they evidently made this part of the brickwork unstable, and this kind of settled a little bit. So I think we had to redo some of this. But anyways, part of what we did in this restoration is we literally took hundreds of photographs at each one of these stages. So if you go to, for example, the images for this is just for this window right here. These are all the images that were taken during the restoration for the fabrication of this window, for original evidence of the window that was still present. There's that barred window that was used as a model. I think the sill for this window was still in place, and they took that out and used this to model the construction of this window. And I just closed the directory, shoot, but we can go back to it because it's right here. And so what Tessa did is organize all over 100,000 photos into directories by construction element. Like this is window 006, and this is the window in the 006 room, 0 being the basement, the cellar. This, I think the 6 being the room number, and then this is the first window in that room. So every single one of these elements is, and I've gotten into whole nother lecture that I need to bring back on, and because otherwise we'll never get out and do the masonry reconstruction or stabilization work. But anyways, suffice to say, what we did with this restoration is did essentially a demolition, which is not part of the 3 R's of the DuPont fabric, but then encapsulated all that information so that we could go back in a 3D model. Or if, things get crazy in the US and all of a sudden, who runs the government is corporations and folks that are in the upper 1%. And they're like, no, we're not honoring Madison. We're honoring the DuPonts now. We're going to demolish, we're going to take down the DuPont main house and restore it to its, this is getting dark here, restore it to its 20th century glory under the DuPont stewardship. We could do that with what we've done. So hopefully there'd be other ways to do this, like build a 3D model of the DuPont house. So but anyways, suffice to say, there's some reversibility with this. Like every element of the DuPont section that we removed, we recorded. And that's important for honoring the DuPont workers who are building this building. And if you can drill into this is what we'd love to do with the DuPont building, is there are signatures of local Black craftsmen who signed windows that they installed in the 1902, 1903 time period that are recorded, and it would be amazing to incorporate into a model of the early 20th century house. So that hasn't happened, but the DuPont fabric, the Madison fabric, and the work of the enslaved is all captured in this model, as well as the restored house. So this is kind of the ultimate restoration where you're able to restore the house in the physical form, but then in a digital form. And then one last thing, just to encourage you to go and explore this model, is it's not just the exterior. This is where I still get giddy. This is so freaking cool, is you can turn the roof off and go in and look at the elements of the interior. Like this is one of my favorite parts right here in one of the upstairs room. This is a photographic rendering of this hearth. And then you click on it, and then here's all, Tessa's favorite images, and then all these CAD drawings, field notes, overview, investigations, just, oh my God, so much resources. And then, as you might expect, we got the first floor there too. Here's the drawing room. Whip around here to this amazing pedimented doorway right here, which is straight out of Monticello. And you got all this evidence here of like what was, plastered over in 1848 during the Thornton period, that basically, and this is original Madison plaster here, Madison era plaster here, that has the original hole for the dowel that held this thing in place and allowed this to be installed back in place with the lift right here. And then, oh my goodness, if you go to, I'm not even going to do this. If you go to the images of this, it's just like, I think the next half hour would be waiting for Google to bring up all the images. It'd just be scrolling down and down and down. It's really cool. So if anybody has problems sleeping at night, I've got your way to take away any thoughts you have of your life and just go into the model and then go to sleep. So your body needs sleep. This is a new way to have kind of like meditation. So anyway, so that's restoration. Now for reconstruction, we can stay in the same model and visit the South Yard. And in case you're wondering, no, this isn't like 2001 with these monoliths out here. I have not successfully figured out a way to render trees. So in online, so these are tubes. Sorry, we'll figure that out one day. And I think if I rendered the trees, and actually, again, I'm not going to go too far on this. We have every single tree modeled with the LiDAR. And we've got points on the landscape for this, and we've been able to extract the height. So what I want to do in spare time, or maybe even with this project we're coming up, is to render all the trees across the property with their height and whether it's a hardwood or a softwood. Anyways, lots of stuff embedded in all this. GIS rocks. It's just like it's really cool. So these, what Tessa has done is rendered these from a basically what's called a surface model where it's basically just one element taken out of SketchUp. One day we'd like to render all the buildings at Montpelier the same way we've done with the main house, where it's all accurately represented. But in the case of the South Yard, what we did is we restored these buildings, and the scene model is not as robust as the 2D model. So I'm going to go into the 2D model for this, because you can't switch between elements as well. This is a reconstruction with the South Yard. So with the South Yard and what you see today with the reconstructed space, none of these buildings existed when we started this. This is what it looked like back in 2011 when we did the excavations. We had the timber frame ghosts of the buildings that were based on the insurance plan. We hadn't yet done the investigations yet, but we were able to capture enough information from the archaeology to do an accurate reconstruction of the buildings. So this is, the South Yard is an example of reconstruction. And with a reconstruction, similar to a restoration, you're picking a time period to go back to and going to that fixed period in time. And with the South Yard, it's a little bit crazy. We're picking a period that is 1820, before Nellie Conway Madison had passed away. And in the archaeology, we had discovered, with the work, that there were porches put on these houses by the enslaved probably in the 1830s. And, we would like to restore these back. And this is something that Jerome and we've talked with Jerome a lot about, is with the reconstruction work. What we've got with the South Yard is an architectural model of the South Yard where the buildings are restored or reconstructed, but we've not reconstructed the yard spaces. And there's a lot of evidence we found with the archaeology of temporary buildings, yard surfaces that aren't in there. So this is kind of a sterile environment. So there's grades of reconstruction, and there's ways that include the full gamut of activities and ways that don't. So as you can imagine from the toner of this discussion, we're bucking to get, do full restoration in the South Yard. And there's things that need to happen to make that happen. A whole nother discussion there. So but there's another form of reconstruction. My God, too many R's in the morning. Another form of reconstruction you can see in the home farm, where the other blacksmith shop site is, but where we've reconstructed the buildings that are associated with the homes of more than likely the blacksmiths. And we found the archaeological footprint of these buildings, which consisted mainly of subfloor pits. But then we used that to do ghostings of the buildings. And I'm pretty sure this is the one, the log cabin program you were on, Michelle, and Vivian, you're on a couple of these for the ghosting this building. And with ghosting this building, obviously it's reconstructed, but it's done in a way that, you know, it's light on the landscape. We don't have the roof on there, we don't have the windows. And this is intentional because we haven't done enough excavations at these buildings to do an accurate reconstruction. With the South Yard, we're probably never going to tear down these buildings. I mean, even if they're inaccurate, we'll probably renovate them. Hopefully we will renovate them to fix some things that we figured out aren't right, but they're there and the damage has been done. This kind of reconstruction is above the archaeology. We could simply take these buildings away and do more work. And so, for example, like with the duplexes here, when we ghosted these buildings in 2011, these were light on the ground. So no archaeology was hurt in the process of ghosting these structures so that we could go in and do full archaeology on all these buildings. And so, for example, I'm going to find the one that we were talking about earlier, the picture. Let's see if it's here. Yay, there's Liz. So here's a picture of Liz with the chimney that had fallen. So here's the south kitchen. So this is gonna make you crazy. I'm sorry. Where are we? There's the duplexes. Here's the ghosted building as it looked in 1911, 2011. Deep breaths, don't need to talk like an auctioneer. Here's the excavation in 2016. After those timber frame buildings had been removed, they were just sitting lightly on the landscape, you know, not even we basically took the grass off and put in like a little cinder block to build them up in place. And so that meant that all the archaeology was left in place. And then this is the top, all this chimney right here collapsed. And here's the top of the chimney. And again, I can't start drilling down on this because we're going to go on for like till 2 o'clock. This is this chimney top that Liz is pointing out the necking on this chimney that is has a parging on it that's very similar to the parged neck of the collar band that's on the 1765 house, which gave that event. So this is the planter's cottage. So again, whole other thing that we can talk about. And then behind Liz is all the chimney, which is so cool. All this chimney that collapsed in place. So that's just like a layer of rubble. So too cool. But so, you know, and again, with all this, I mean, technically, I mean, if there's enough money, you can do anything. We could go in. Where are we? All right. We could go in if we decided these buildings were way wrong, tear them all down and reconstruct them. I mean, if like somebody gave us another, I mean, and Mark, if you're still there, this probably goes totally against your adaptive reuse and like carbon footprint. But we could tear these buildings down and rebuild them based on, you know, new knowledge that we have. And again, that all that takes is another Rubenstein to do that. But probably not going to happen in our lifetime. I'm not betting my retirement on that. So anyways, that's restoration. And then for reconstruction, no, that's reconstruction. So that's reconstruction with the South Yard and the field porter, and varying degrees you can do with that, like how far you can go with those reconstructions from a ghosted to completely restored, you know, to the buildings being restored. But then we haven't restored all the elements of those buildings yet. That's still to come with the yard spaces and the barbecue trench and the temporary buildings that we found that were between the north dwelling and the smokehouse, just all kinds of things that still needs to happen. Now, renovation is something that can be really beautiful and inspiring, or it can get really ugly. And so, it depends on your perspective. If you like modern stuff, some renovations are super nice and it's all like plastic windows that slide up and then you can take them out and clean them. And if you love old sash windows, you're just crying. And that's why the windows upstairs, you know, we could literally shoot notes out the window they're like you can slip paper through them. We need to restore those sash windows, and that's one day we are going to do that with scaffolding and a program like this. But we didn't have the money to do that with this renovation. But we'll go from the ugly to the happy. That's sad, say that's sad to the happy. We're not going to judge it. We'll say sad to happy. And so an example that you all are going to see today of a renovation that is, has its reasons, and this is where, the decision making process in this, I don't think was taken to this degree. But if there's processes of evaluating buildings, and if it's, say, for example, like a Sears kit building, where there's like 200 examples of it that are been restored or renovated across the property. You've got plans, videos. If one gets demolished, meh, as long as it's not like one that has had substantial alterations to it, you could see justifying demolishing it. If it was the model for the Sears kit building, maybe you wouldn't want to demolish that. Maybe you'd want to restore it. And so an example of this is House 11. And just to give you all like a where you are with this footprint right here in 3D land, here's the blacksmith shop. Here's the old the horse van barn, which today used to have a bucket truck in it. And then here's the old archaeology lab, which was the crew meal house back in the day. And for House 11, which is where you all will be going to the bathroom, so you'll be familiar with this soon. I think this is the door you'll go in. I've got the key card for it. But this view right here is the view I want you to look at, because if you click on this building right here, and then you go to some of the historic images, first, not a lot of good images of House 11. And I'm going to close out some of these because my computer gets mad when I have too many of these open. I have like a whole line of these and that crashes. I'm like, what could go wrong? By Ray, you're awesome. I just closed that Ray Kennedy's picture. So this is such a cool picture of House 11. This is during one of the races that happened, what are these called?
Horse shows.
Yeah, the horse shows that happened at Montpelier like in 1910 or 1911. These are in the early DuPont scrapbooks. And there's House 11 in how it appeared in around 1908, 1911. And this picture right here, this picture right here is what House 11 looked like before the renovation that happened let's see, Steve Chronister is still here. So that was like in 2010. And yeah, John had bought his new Toyota truck. So this is what House 11 looked like. You can see these are, there's this, the cottage addition right here. The windows are all intact. These are the original sash windows. And then, and actually, this is kind of cool. This window right here is the one that's in my office today. Because what happened is, I did not order that window. What happened is that when they did the renovations on House 11, this is what the building looks like during renovation. So basically the shell of House 11 is left. But when you go in, it looks like a modern building, which is kind of depressing if you like old buildings, because it was a historic structure. But I mean, at least the footprint of the building is there. Today, all the windows are plastic, and they're easy to clean. Upkeep on it is easier. So this is an example of a renovation. Won't parse too much judgment on that, but you can tell where we sit on this one. Another example of a renovation. I won't get too much into this because I'm beating a dead horse by this point. Sorry, Liz. This one right here, Lewis Hall, is a building we have not modeled yet. But Lewis Hall, this is another example of a renovation where the renovation is closer to, keeping the character of the building. So Lewis Hall used to be the brick stable. It was where the carriages were kept in 1908. And what's cool about the pre-Marion DuPont Scott days is her mom and dad did not allow any motor vehicles on the property until they died. So it was all horses and carriages through 1928 about. And then it's so funny, like these generational changes. As soon as mom and dad were in the grave, Mary DuPont Scott brought in macadam and paved all of Montpelier and started hauling in vehicles. So she was like, bye, mom and dad. All right, time to do what we need to do here. So I made it into a horse farm. And so what Lewis Hall looked like when I started here is it looked like this. So you've got no porch on the front. You've got here are the windows. And then what it looks like today is this picture of Lewis Hall in the grand opening when it became Lewis Hall. I still would like to call it the brick stable, but that's just me. Called being old, get over it. The Lewis Hall is named after the first chairman of the board, who is a lovely human being. So it's great to have it be Lewis Hall. Too much information, sorry. But in this case, the original windows are kept, which is really nice. So all the wavy glass is there. The character of the building is there. It's been adapted so that you've got these fronts that were added, which is kind of cool because they're modeled after this little porch that's right here. So, there's care taken in preserving the building. And then, the other example of, a building that we're happy with, but still, we had to make some concessions, is our building here at Calm, which is the old DuPont store. And with this building, and we need to render the windows like with some interior shots would be fun. I mean, Tessa did some amazing work with all this, but our building here, you can see this is the photo of it in 1911, and pretty much everything that's there is what we got today, even these steel columns. And the reason why that's really amazing is like we were talking about when we were down in Fairfield, is this building used to be about 50 feet in that direction when Route 20 is that road that's right in front of the freight building right there. And so the front porch was basically, when you went off the front steps, you were standing at the center line of what Route 20 is today. And then in 1949, VDOT realigned Route 20, and then all 1, 2, 3 of these buildings and their outbuildings were moved back. And that's why this building has the cinder block foundation and not the brick foundation that's rendered in this photo right here. And I'm not sure, I need to figure out if the cellar, we had a cellar of that. I'm not sure, but things that we need to look at. Yeah. That door looks pretty original. Maybe we did have a cellar. So anyways, too many details. But with this, what we've done is I don't need to show it to you, you can just look. This, we've leaned in on this DuPont heritage. Like with this, we have tried, I mean, like even with the putting in new HVAC system, like on this one, we basically tried to keep the ductwork in one of these shelving panels and then kept like this, we had to make decisions. Parts of the shelving were removed that were just square cut, but we kept the coping. I guess this is what this would be called, the coping on the front of this counter intact. And so, with mind that this building could be restored back to its 1911 appearance, and the floor that's in here, we love because it's a lab. The original floor is still underneath all this vinyl because the choice was to either sand the floor down to nearly within an inch of its life. I don't think any of the floor would have been left. It was like a Asian waves. But on this floor is all the ghosts of where the counters used to be when this was a store. Like I think this counter used to be over here, but there's another bigger counter that was here in 1911. All that's preserved not only under the vinyl, but under 1/2-inch plywood, which has stabilized the floor as well. So it doesn't feel like you're riding a boat when you walk across the floor. So we've tried to keep all the fabric intact in here. So this is an example of a renovation where we've gone to the nth degree to preserve everything. And that's probably OCD with us as archaeologists too, factored into all this too. And then the final other thing that can happen with buildings is, buildings that aren't being used today are, stabilization. And an example of that is in the over at Arlington House, and we wanted to do the 3D model just because this is really fun. Um, I think, yeah, this is one that we want to complete. We've got Arlington, and Arlington actually is another example. We went over this last night with the adaptive reuse of Arlington. We've kept as much of this building intact by even putting sheetrock up over the old plaster walls that were failing, just so it's kept intact, so investigations can be done of that. And so this is what, this is one of, actually, this is the earliest photo of Arlington. This is taken out of that movie that I'm going to send you when I send you all these 3D maps and access maps. There's an awesome video that was done by the Craig family who lived at Arlington of both. And it's just like, when we found it is right after the fire of Arlington, and this building is too, which is just so cool. So you can see action movies of what's going on in the 1930s here, but Arlington is pretty. This is after the renovations that included the plumbing wing here, and then raising the roof on the house. But an example of stabilization of a building can be seen with the home for an enslaved family that's in the yard here. And actually, yeah, Tessa did render all these. That's why this is such an awesome model. This one right here, you can see this building, and when you click on the base here, what you can see is this shot right here that shows that there used to be a chimney right here, but it was about to collapse. This was taken down in the early 1990s, and it would have been nice if it had just been taken down to where the flue was, where it started to corbel up, but it got taken down all the way down. But for the rest of the building, what we did in 2017 is we stabilized the structure so that, basically all these footers were completely falling apart. The sill was rotting, and we've stabilized the building and left everything intact so that in the future, if, we wanted to do a restoration of this building and interpret the period of enslavement with this section of the building, and then interpret the section of the building that's from this side over where this gentleman is standing, and interpret the post-emancipation time period. We could use this part of the building as well, and even into the DuPont period with the wallpaper that's in the structure. So in this case, even though we're a property that, focuses on the 19th century, we've kept all of this intact and kept, keeping it stable and basically mothballing it for future use. And so a lot of times questions arise is, why don't you restore the building to its, period of enslavement and use it and to showcase it as a building at Arlington House? Well, the problem with that is Arlington is not being used as an interpretive venue. It's being used as not use it as residence by interns, but also as a words are escaping me, as a building where people sleep in, whatever that is, where for programmatic housing. So that's it. I need more coffee. But if we ever did, make this into an interpretive center, it's at that point that we'd want to decide how we restore the building, and then do some really, if we were going to take the home back to its mid-19th century appearance, do some really intricate recording of parts of the building before they were taken down. So, and then the other part of, work that's done, and it's not really work, but is how to care for buildings, or maybe not care for buildings, is neglect. And this is the case with Tags Island, which if you look at the 2D map, which gives you kind of a better bird's eye view of where everything is. So here's Arlington House right here. We're over at Calm up here. Tags Island is this community that was built up by 1908, but there are buildings in this community of buildings that date back to the 19th century. So when you look at the 3D model right here, this building over here, which is slightly off from its footings, because this is where it's located. This is where bringing in stuff into scene can get a little bit wonky. But if you look at this tenant building right here, and you look at this picture, the asbestos siding has been taken off, and you can see a log building behind there. So this log building dates back potentially to the period of the Gilmore cabin, and is something that's falling apart today, and it needs to be stabilized. I mean, this is an incredible structure, and as we do more oral history, there's chances we're going to figure out what family lived there, and letting this just fall apart is just an opportunity. You know, if you wanted to be really mercenary about it, for funding that we'll never be able to achieve, because if it goes away, we can never apply for a grant to do work on this building, and we don't have a chance to preserve the history of this building in a way that you can do with other buildings. And a really good example of that is with what's called the Page House. So zoom out here, don't want to make anybody sick, but we'll back up here, go up Jacksontown Road, and there's a building here that has an amazing history because of its history, but its association with a person that's very dear to us, Jane Sheldon, whose grandmother, Lillian Page, rented this house from 1925 up until 1978. And this is a picture of Jane and her husband, Robert, visiting the site in 2021. They just moved into my neighborhood, and we started talking, and Jane said, well, I used to visit Montpelier, and my grandmother lived in one of those little green buildings. And I was like, oh my God, which one? And she was like, on Jacksontown Road. And I was like, the Page House? And she was like, yeah. So we went back and visited. This is Robert. I had tried to pump the well a bunch, and no water was coming out. And then Robert came out and lifted the veil up once and pushed it down, and water started gushing out. Jane screamed. And then she was like, oh my God, this brought back a memory of, my grandmother being on the porch here with her washing machine and telling me, go out and get a bucket of water. And me saying, why should I do that, Grandma? And the next thing, she was off her feet and getting a swack on the butt and saying, because I said so. So, this is the power of like buildings in place. And then we did, this was, I don't know if anybody was here for this recreation program. Were you on this one, Vivian? Yeah. Our resident guinea pig, Vivian, was here experimenting with new programs. And oh, I get it. Yeah, you came in the one that was after this one, but oh, you were on the Page House. Oh, awesome. Okay.
On the second.
I can't remember, whatever it is, y'all were on that one. Yeah. That's awesome. So you all got to be part of this, like where Jane walked through the building and had brought back memories of her childhood that without the building wouldn't have been resurrected. So there's a power with like being in these spaces that's incredible. And so this is the building, and this is where if you want to, you could write to the current president and director of development and say, I heard a horrible story about this house where there's a hole in the roof and water's coming in and it's rotting, and there should be like maybe $200 worth of work to patch the roof so it can be stabilized to tell these stories. If you wanted to, and I can give you the email address, this will be in that. I'll send you another email because I'm a paranoid MF about sending emails when I'm not there. You'll get another email from my personal email address on this one. Yeah, because
Any other people?
Yeah,
Any other people?
Yeah.
The email?
I'll put it in the email.
Okay.
So I'm not about to say anything else. This conversation. Oh shit! This conversation's being recorded. Oh well, I don't give a shit. I've worked here long enough. No one's gonna. Anyways, this building needs to have something done about it because it is an amazing structure that is like the early 20th century history of this property. And Lillian Page is the descendant of her, Jane's grandmother, of pages who were in Uno, which is up the road, and all the folks there are descended from folks that were enslaved here. So like, this is what we're doing. I mean, this is what we need to do. And like these buildings that are going away.
It's like part of an origin story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It is an origin story of the DuPont worker community, but then also has roots about why these families were here to begin with, so the DuPonts could hire them, because they have ancestry that goes back 200 years to this space where, it's, yeah, you get it. And these buildings hold these kind of histories, and we need to work on this. So anyways, our goal is like, you can't, like Mark was saying, or he was insinuating, you can't necessarily save every single structure that's on the property. Oh my God, I'm lost. Yeah, here's Tags Island. So there's Arlington House. Never mind, we're gonna move up the road to Tags Island. There's Aiken Field. Yeah, here's Tags Island. So for this history right here, you've got 4 buildings that could be stabilized. Some, have an earlier history that has, that we don't even know about. Others have a history that, are from the DuPont period. And I love this picture. I got to show you this one. These are my 2 kids, Cole and Tess. When we first started working at Montpelier, we lived here at this house. I don't know why that's in me. I'm tired. So it's just, and now these buildings are like, this is the picture, and these buildings are in pretty good shape, but they need to be stabilized. This building has a tin roof, not a slate roof. So, it's not long for this world, but the slate roof building like this one, that slate lasts. I mean, it's absolutely amazing. So, yeah, that's like the full story here, going from, and it's 9:22, so we should move on. But the 3 R's of restoration, reconstruction, and renovation, but then what you do with buildings otherwise. And so putting this into the context of what we're doing this week is, over at Arlington, we've got the Arlington House that's being adaptively reused as a renovation. We're trying to stabilize this chimney in a way so that no harm is done to it. The work we're doing ostensibly potentially could be reversed, but not necessarily. But it's not Portland cement. It's not going to do any harm to the brick.
It can absolutely be reversed.
Okay, yeah, nice. That's good to hear. So it can be reversed if we did a study of the mortar on the existing chimney. And what we probably want to do, actually, brings us to mind. We'll definitely want to capture a sand sample, and I'll give the schedule out in a second. But yeah, Lee, if you could bring some baggies and get some sand, and yeah, Thomas. Yeah, Thomas too, over at the blacksmith shop. Let's capture some of the sand, both in the Arlington chimney and the blacksmith's chimney, before those get taken down. And get a bunch. I mean, why not? We can always throw it away later. You can't go back and get it again. But it'd be really cool to look at this stuff under a microscope and see, is it what kind of, is it rounded sand grains? Is it quartz? Did it come from the Rapidan? Where is it coming from? That'd be pretty sweet to look at. That's something we want to keep for posterity. But with the Arlington House, we're stabilizing the chimney for its continued renovation and use as a programmatic structure for programmatic housing. But over at the blacksmith shop, for this building over here, the work that's happening on this one, this is one that yeah, not many good historic photos of the blacksmith shop. This is one of the best ones, and you can see it pretty well here. Here's the opening right here. So this is the view. This is always fun to do. Ah, yeah, this is the farm barn right here, just to like put this in context. So that horse show was in this ring right here. The carriages were riding around looking at House 11. There's the blacksmith shop. Here's the farm barn, which is a mid-19th century farm barn that was taken down in 2010. And it was in pretty bad shape, but should have been saved. It was just part of some of the dumb politics that happened here. And then here's the schooling barn that is, being stabilized and saved today. But with the blacksmith shop, what we're trying to do with that is basically stabilize it for whatever happens next. It could be, we could end up restoring it back to a period where, where the original, like we were talking about yesterday, where the original forge hearth was. We might restore it back to its 1930s, 40s, little nose that comes out of the hearth. That would be determined on what we're trying to do with it. Or we might want to do, a renovation / restoration where we use it for blacksmithing. And then we would consult with, historians, historic blacksmiths on how it best could be used. And so with this, what we want to do is be conservative. And this, there is a purpose behind all this. And this, behind this, having this discussion happen before we go out and even remove like the first brick, is that we want to keep as much intact as possible. Now, if meaning keeping as much intact as possible means that we've got to sacrifice 20% so that 80% doesn't collapse in a year, or from the work that we're doing, that has to be addressed. And then we'll want to do pictures with the iPad and do a scan of all this before any kind of like major work happens. And that's something I should have thought about before this. Is like,
Forecast start removing bricks off the top of it.
well, last week when there's more time, I know, yeah, yeah, we can still do a quick scan thing, and that wouldn't be a problem. So yeah, it's, I mean, the worst that's happened to that chimney already has, where there's a massive crack in it. So it's not looking like it did in 1935. So we're all good. But the point behind all the discussing this and this long drawn out conversation is that what we want to do with these buildings is be as conservative as possible. And that's what I was saying yesterday is like it's like when you're in an excavation unit and you see that beautiful piece of ceramic sticking out of the wall. What do you want to do? You want to rip it out. And then we all have a heart attack because you destroyed that profile. Or there's that thimble that's sticking up out of a darker brown area in the middle of the clay unit. And you're like, oh, I want to see that thimble. It's like, no, that's a feature. We gotta wait and go to bring it down stratigraphically. Same with these structures. We don't want you walking up and being like, oh, that looks like a loose brick. Let me look at it. And you pull it out and like all sorts of hell breaks loose. There's safety, but then there's also integrity. We want to record as much as possible before doing that. And in some cases, doing a little bit of investigation yesterday allowed us to determine what we need to do today before starting to remove the big part of that nose or whatever needs to happen. And I'm using weird terms like the nose of that thing, this part that sticks out on the hearth. So this is, the bigger why behind this lecture is like, always be approaching stuff with caution. And before getting into the schedule, anybody have any questions, comments, suggestions?
I think Chris brought donuts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, let's take a stretch break, get donuts, and then we'll talk about the schedule. So, yeah.
I know. When you were saying yesterday, all that fell, I think I was going.
I don't know if y'all are running out to the video. All worth it. Wow. Well, so get up and stretch and then we'll talk about the,
I'm glad you're here.
I didn't touch that half.
Yeah, good. Busy.
Is this still recording?
Oh, yeah, that's true. We'll get out of this. So thank you.
Is that one of those that
I think you get one, you get either one or many.
check out the learn?
I'll have to get you one of those then. It's, I'll try to find an unburned one, so. Let's see.
I don't know.
Stuff here. It looks like,
Kitchen up one.
hey, bye, Mark. I'm not sure if you're still there.
Yeah, he left.
Oh, left, okay, all right. All right, well, thanks for listening to this lecture, whoever's listening, and we'll, see you at Montpelier. Awesome.